Would you like to try needle felting onto your crochet but feeling unsure about where to start? Well, you've come to the right place, because today I'm going to teach you all about the basics of needle felting onto crochet and how to do it. So when I started to felt a few years back, I didn't really come across many resources that explained exactly how to needle felt onto crochet specifically. So this video is basically an accumulation of all the things I wish I knew when I first started out. Quick disclaimer before we get started, some of the ideas or methods I'll talk about definitely have more than one correct way to do them. So I just want to make it clear, I'm not saying this is the only right way to needle felt onto crochet, this is just how I personally do it. Remember to experiment, give it a go, and do what makes the most sense to you. We're going to start off right at the beginning with what materials you'll need to get started with felting. First off, we'll talk about wool roving. This is the material that you'll be using to felt onto your crochet. And here you can see all of the wool roving that I use. I have all these colours stored in this big bag, and all of the smaller colours here came from a beginner's needle felting kit. If you search for a felting kit online, they're very common. I would definitely recommend giving one a go if you're just starting out. I found it really useful to have such a range of colours on hand. You can see here for the colours I do use more often, like pink and black, I bought some more wool roving separately online in bigger amounts. I'll include links in the description for both of the places where I bought these colours from. So secondly, let's talk about needles. A felting needle is a special barbed needle and your most important tool. Needles can actually be surprisingly overwhelming for someone starting out because there's a lot of different types and gauges. Felting needles have gauges that range from 32 to 42. And remember, the lower your number is, the bigger your needle will be. I found that bigger needles don't really work for felting onto crochet. The needle will just push your roving into those holes between the stitches. And so if you do get some needles, you'll want to get the smallest size possible, around the 40 or 42 mark. Not only do the needles have different gauges, but they also have different shaft shapes, meaning that the barbs are arranged differently on the needle, depending on what you want to use it for. Now, I won't go too in depth on this, but the needles with the triangular shaft are the best for general purpose. So the needles that I have here are from Heidi Feathers, who I'll also link down below, and they are 42 gauge triangular shaft needles, and I use this needle type for everything. I find these needles are just the perfect all-rounders and do everything that I need. You can see here I have my needle in a little wooden handle, and you can get lots of different handles for your needles, but I find that this simple one works fine for me. It was included with the felting kit I bought, and I've used it ever since. So let's get started with something really nice and easy. I've crocheted a simple little strawberry here, and we're going to give it some seeds. I've included the pattern for the strawberry down in the description, so you can make your own and work along with me if you'd like. I'd suggest that you use either acrylic yarn or natural wool yarn to make your strawberry. Personally, I prefer acrylic as it's inexpensive and really easy to work with. I'd also advise that you stuff your strawberry quite firmly, as it's more difficult to felt onto something softer, as it will begin to sink a bit as you poke into it. Now you have your little berry all ready to go. Next up, you'll need your 42 gauge needle, and here I'm using a nice bright yellow wool roving that you'll hopefully be able to see nice and clearly. So all we're going to do first is tear off a small amount of roving. We just want enough to make a small oval, but do keep in mind that the amount you take should initially be larger than the finished product you want, because a lot of those fibres will be condensed and will also sink down into your crochet. You can see here that all I'm doing is using my fingers to shape this little blob of roving. Since we want a sort of circular shape, I'm just rolling it around a bit to get something similar to that. Now once I'm happy with my rough shape, I'm going to pop my felting straight onto my crochet and just start stabbing away with my needle. You might need to hold your roving onto your crochet with your finger initially until the fibres have tangled enough to keep it there on its own. So as you can see, all I'm doing is jabbing away here at the roving and strawberry to basically join the two together. I'm not sure entirely how to explain it, but you can see that as I'm working, I'm making these little dragging movements with my needle to pick up the fibres and shape them to lay where I want them to go. So this will slowly make the oval shape I want, just like the seed that you can already see on the top right there. Remember as you're jabbing that you don't need to go all of the way in, and you definitely don't want to be going out the other side of your strawberry. You just want to stick the tip of your needle in. You can see here where it's thinner on the end. This is the only part of the needle that has the barbs on that are going to be doing the work for you. So if I'm felting onto a stuffed piece like this, I'll aim to get through the 2 layers of roving and crochet, and then poke a little bit into the stuffing underneath, and that will be just fine. Don't be afraid to take your time here, get used to the feel of the material and how to shape it. I often think of needle felting like you're drawing, but with a needle. It's just a different medium and canvas, and takes practice like any other medium can to get used to. Sometimes I'll also get in there and shape the roving a little bit with my fingernail, just pushing it about to where exactly I want it to lay. Another thing to watch out for is to stick your needle straight into the plush and straight out. Do not bend it. This needle is especially fragile, especially because it is a 42 gauge. It's quite thin and bending it will cause it to snap. You can see here that there's a small amount of bend to it, but if I went any further than that, I would probably lose my needle. It can be especially frustrating if it snaps inside your plush and gets lost in there. So take it from experience, they can be such a pain to try and fish back out of the plush, so be warned. So you can see here that everything is slowly starting to become more refined as I've been poking it, and I've made a nice little oval just like the first seed that I already had there. Don't be afraid to pause here and take your time with getting used to making this shape on your own strawberry, but feel free to continue on if you're feeling a little bit more adventurous. So let's say we want our strawberry to have a heart-shaped seed on it. It may sound a little bit daunting to make a more advanced shape, but all of the principles are exactly the same and practice makes perfect. Here I am again taking off a small amount of my roving and starting to shape it a little bit with my fingers. As I'm doing this, I'm kind of feeling out the shape a bit and doing a little bit of fiddling to get a rough heart shape instead of a circle this time. So here you can see I've got a very vague heart shape, which is all you really need to get started. So let's pop this bit onto our strawberry and start felting again. You can see that I'm using the same method from before, where I'm just dragging and manipulating the roving to get it to lay where I want it to go. Remember that you're in charge and don't be afraid to push the material to see what kind of shapes you can make. As I'm working on this shape, you can see it's slowly becoming more refined, and now we have a nice little heart on our strawberry. You'll know when you're finished when your roving feels nice and secure on the surface of your crochet. No matter what shape you're making, the overall method here is pretty much the same. Feel free to spend some more time on your strawberry before moving on when you're ready, but just to show you exactly how you can use simple shapes to make quite effective pieces, let's move on to another example. Here we have an unfinished growlithe, and this is one of the patterns available on my Etsy. Let's take a look at what a finished one looks like. So you can see I still have some embroidery to do here, but we're going to focus in just on the felted details, and mainly for this video the toe beans and the ear. So let's take a look at the toe beans first. So really, when you look at it, these beans are only made up of 4 simple ovals, just like you made on your strawberry, but a little bit bigger. I like to start with the big paw pad at the bottom first, so let's get into that. So I'm going to grab my pink wool roving and start shaping it again with my fingers. Remember, if you get the amount wrong, you can always take some off or add some more on while you're felting. It's very flexible and you can just respond to how you're feeling about it as you're going along. So you can see here that I have an amount roughly the same as the big paw pad here on the finished piece, so we're all set to get started on the foot. I'm going to position the roving near the bottom of the foot since we need room for the 3 extra toe beans on top, and I'm just going to use exactly the same method as before, poking away with my needle and slowly refining the shape until I'm happy with it. So here I'm nearing the end and I'm feeling good about this big paw pad, so let's move on to the smaller toe beans. Again, I'll just tear off some roving, give it a little bit of shape and then get started. When working on something like this, it's always better to start in the middle. So you can see here that I'm working on the middle toe bean, and I find it's much easier to get everything more central if you're working in the middle and then moving your way out. One thing I do want to quickly mention here is something that I am very guilty of still forgetting myself. If you're starting to feel like your needle isn't making much of an impact and it's taking forever to get something felted, then replace your needle. The barbs on your needle will wear down eventually with use, so if you're starting to feel like things are a bit more difficult than they should be, then it's time to swap in a new needle. These could probably do with being poked in a little bit more to be completely secure, but I just wanted to use it as a quick example to show that most of my felting really is made up of these very simple shapes like circles and ovals. Let's try something a little bit different now and felt one of Growlith's ears. You can see here on my finished one that he has these rough circles felted on, and the colour that I've used for this is exactly the same as the colours on his crocheted muzzle and belly. So I'm going to show you here how I've gotten the exact same colour. Here I have a small length of the acrylic yarn in the cream colour that I used to crochet those pieces, and all I'm going to do here is start splitting it up into its individual fibres. I'm using double knit yarn here, which I think converts to 8 ply, and it is usually made up of 3 strands, but your own yarn may vary. Then I'm going to take one of these 3 strands and split it up even more so that we're basically making fluff out of it. I just do this by running my nail down it to help separate things out, and then tearing it apart and ripping it up. I'm going to do this with all 3 of my strands and then combine all the fluff at the end. Now the next thing to tackle here is how to felt exactly onto flat pieces like this, since we don't have any stuffing to poke our needle into. It's probably a bit unconventional, but for pieces like this I actually use a blanket. So this is just a small baby blanket that I keep around specifically for this purpose. The reason I'm using a blanket is because I want to have something behind the ear to support it as I'm stabbing, but the aim here is not to sink the needle through the back and into the blanket. You actually want to insert your needle very little into the ear so that it doesn't come out the other side. If you do have the needle come out the other side, then the back side of your ear will end up a little bit messy, which is something we obviously don't want. The other thing I like about my blanket method is that it will protect my fingers if I do happen to go a little bit too far through the ear, since the blanket will end up catching the needle and I won't get hurt. But you can see here that the overall method is still the same. Although I'm not inserting my needle in as far, all I'm doing is just catching the fibres with it and jabbing them in to get the overall shape that I want. So you can see here it's really starting to take shape, and that's basically all there is to it. I have quite a few patterns, like my evolution patterns, that I use this exact method on their ears too. You can make basically any shape you want on any ear you want, as long as you remember, put something behind the ear to support it, protect your fingers, and don't put your needle in too deeply. We're going to move on now to the last example I have here for this video. So I've shown you how to make the simple circular shapes that make up most of my pieces, but let's say for example that you want to needle felt a smile onto the face of one of your plushies. You can see here that I have an unfinished Jirachi plush. This pattern hasn't been released at the time that this video is going out, but it will be on my Etsy very soon. Let's have a look at the finished version, and you can see here that he has a nice little smile on the middle of his face, so let's replicate this on our blank one. I'm going to start as normal by taking some of my wool roving and starting to shape it with my hands, but instead of rolling it to make a circle, I'm going to shape it and twist it into a long cylinder. Then I'm going to do the same as usual and place my piece onto the plush and start felting. This one is definitely a bit more delicate as you're felting just across this thin line. Like I mentioned before, it's always a really good idea to start in the middle of your pieces and then work your way out. So off camera I'd be felting exactly like this by doing the mouth first and then putting the eyes on either side, then probably moving out to add blush and other details after that. I know it sounds silly, but I used to work from left to right, and sometimes I'd end up with faces that were a little bit off because it's so much harder to judge the positioning when you're starting on one side and moving over instead of starting with a central point and moving out. So don't repeat the mistakes that I made. Now that I'm happy that my smile is fairly secure and that I have a good base shape, I'm going to cut off the excess here, but not all of the way. I still want a little bit extra to work with, because remember that your roving is going to shrink as you work with it. It's always better to cut less off and then come back and take a little bit more later than take too much off, especially when doing more delicate smiles like this. You could end up with things becoming a little bit messy. So all I'm doing here is just poking in the ends and tidying up that smile, making sure it's all secure until I'm happy with it. And that's it, you should be left with a nice smile and be ready to start working onto the rest of the face. That's all I have for this one. I really hope some of you guys out there found this helpful, and just let me know down in the comments section if you'd like me to make any other tutorial type videos like this and what you'd like them to be about. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.